Live and local sports talk is right here with Klahr and Company. Brought to you by Argonaut Wine and Liquor featuring Jack Daniels with your host, Michael Klahr.
And welcome. It is almost July, but we are in the midst of our college football preview season here on Klahr and Company. Very pleased that our opening guest today, first time we've ever talked to him in person, it will be Phil Steele. I'm Michael Klahr.
And I'm Mark Knutson. I must confess to being still in baseball mode. Sorry. I'm working on it, but still baseball season.
We will, though, begin with college football, and we'll have more than one college football segment on this show today. And we welcome the man whose magazine I took with me to the beach and read it on the plane both ways.
With that magazine.
I do. It is Phil Steele's college football preview for 2018, and we welcome Phil in. Good morning, Phil.
Well, good morning. How are you, gentlemen?
We're doing swell and really pleased to have you here. And, starting with a moment of local interest here, you've got the University of Colorado off of a tough season as your number 4 most improved team in the nation.
Yeah, and, when I look at Colorado, I see a team that missed out on a bowl last year. And even though they only come in number 107 on my experience chart, I have great faith in Coach Mike McIntyre. I think he's one of the better head coaches out there. And I like the talent that he's got coming back this year. Steven Montez didn't have the type of season you would have quite expected, but I still think when you look at this guy, he's 6'5", 230 pounds, throws the ball well. I'm looking for a big year out of him this year. They add in a Trayvon McMillan from Virginia Tech at running back, so I think the running back core will be fine. The receivers lose some folks. But remember last year they were able to redshirt a guy like Kabion Ento, who was the star of the spring game. He's back. I like the size and the speed of the receiving core. The offensive line's a veteran group, so I look for big-time improvement on the offensive side. Defensively, I rate their linebackers number 50 in the country, the DBs number 33, and then the difference maker sometimes, special teams. I rate it number 13 in the country. Outstanding punter in Alex Kinney, who had a 40.0 net last year, and a solid kicker in James Stefano, who had 17 to 22 field goals and along a 53. Then you factor in the schedule this year. It's not easy. It's not going to be easy to get, to like 8 or 9 wins, playing Nebraska on the road, USC, Washington, Arizona, and Cal all on the road this year. But I think this team's very capable of getting back to a bowl game, despite the fact they have just 10 returning starters.
It's great news here, and I like what you say. And one of the real secrets for those who don't live in Colorado is even though they lost all those senior talented wide receivers, the core they have back, a lot of us think will actually be better. And I'm glad you mentioned Stefano. I think he's a tremendously underrated weapon. The other thing of interest to folks out here is after perhaps their worst season ever, the Pac-12 basketball and football, you've got a Pac-12 team in your Final Four. Let's talk about your Final Four and your national champion this year.
All right, yeah, I like to go against the grain sometimes, and I realize that nationally the Pac-12, especially after that bowl season, non-conference, everybody's just sort of throwing them in the trash. But when I look at Washington this year, and I'll start off with them, this is Chris Peterson's best team he's ever had. I'm talking Boise State, Washington State, best one yet. He's got 17 returning starters coming back this year. Jake Browning at quarterback, and 2 years ago, Jake Browning set a Pac-12 record with 43 touchdown passes. Now, last year, he dropped all the way down to 19, but as you know, I do a lot of analytics in the magazine, and he's pretty much poised for a bounce-back season. Folks I've talked to say he is a talented quarterback despite last year's mediocre numbers. Now they've got Myles Gaskins at running back, solid offensive line, and how about 9 starters back on the defensive side of the ball? I've got them rated the number 5 defense in the country, the number 8 offense in the country, and if they get past Auburn in the opener, the game's not exactly a neutral site being played in Atlanta, but I think they can. They'll be favored in all the rest of their games this year, and I think Washington's got a great shot of running the table and making the playoffs. From other 3 playoff teams that I picked this year, let's start with Alabama, and Alabama's a team that generally ranks number 127 or number 100 on my experience chart because they lose so many players to the NFL. Well, this year they come in at number 50. That's the highest I've seen Alabama ranked. They've got 2 capable quarterbacks in Tua Tagovailoa, as well as Jalen Hurts. Hurts. They've got one of the top running back cores, defense. I go on and on. This team's stacked in every single position. All 3 units on the defense rank in my top 10, despite only having 3 starters back. And when you factor in their schedule this year, Alabama's going to be a double-digit favorite in every single game they play this year. So that was a pretty easy pick for the playoffs. And then
Alabama!
Then the other 2 teams I'm going with, how about Clemson? And, with Clemson at the end of the postseason last year, I thought, wow, this team's going to have to rebuild that defensive line because they got 4 guys leaving early for the NFL draft because they all looked like first, second, or third round picks at the worst. And yet, one by one, they all opted to return. Farrell, Lawrence, Wilkins, Bryant. That's the best defensive line in college football. Probably the best defense in college football. They've got an experienced quarterback in Kelly Bryant who could lose his job to Trevor Lawrence, my number 18 O-line, dangerous running backs and receivers. So I've got Clemson favored in all their games. They have to play Florida State on the road, A&M, Boston College, and Virginia Tech. So they've got some tough road games, but I think they'll be favored in all their games, and I have them making the playoffs, and I think everybody will have Clemson in the playoffs this year. And finally, I went to the Big Ten, and in the Big Ten, you've got 5 legitimate title contenders, talking Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, Michigan State, and Wisconsin. But I went with Ohio State. I think when you look at the quarterback situation, Haskins steps in and gives them a better downfield passer than they had with J.T. Barrett. They've got 2 dangerous running backs in Dobbins and Weber, an outstanding offensive line. Nick Bosa leads the defense. And the 2 teams they face on the road that are really tough this year, Penn State, Michigan State, last year they had over 1,000 yards offense against those 2 teams and allowed under 500 combined yards offense. So I like Ohio State to come out of the Big Ten. So my 4 teams for the playoffs, 3 of them I think most folks picking Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State. My other one is Washington.
We're talking to the one and only Phil Steele. Phil Steele's College Football Preview magazine is out and available. Michael has his copy. It's already wrinkled up, which tells you, I mean, he like sleeps with the thing.
It's been to the beach.
It's been to the beach.
On my vacation.
He is inhaling that magazine.
And on the plane.
Yes. I want to ask you about Alabama a little bit. You mentioned Jalen Hurts. Are you surprised he didn't transfer? And do you think if something could derail a team, a quarterback controversy, if half the locker room wants Hurts, half wants the other guy, that could be problematic?
And I think Hurts is playing it well. I think Coach Saban is playing it well. Now, Saban legitimately is telling me he's still in the mix for the QB spot. I do not think he wins it, but, a 17-1 ratio. And here's the thing with Hurts. Why not pick up another national title ring? And then next year, you can actually graduate and transfer anywhere you want to go without having to sit a year, whereas if he transferred this year, he'd have to sit a year. So I think it makes great sense for him to stay at Alabama. You're only 1 play away from being back to the starting quarterback role. We know that. And I think it's just a perfect situation. So I think both Hurts and Saban handling that extremely well.
Phil, Mark Knudsen, my partner, we know him from his Major League Baseball career, but he's a longtime Heisman voter. You are as well. So I want to get you, both you guys on record preseason where you're leaning on the Heisman vote.
Well, I'll start if that's okay with
Please.
you, Mark. And I'm going to throw out my top 3 guys. And number 1, I'm going with Jonathan Taylor of Wisconsin. Last year as a true freshman, burst on the scene, had nearly 2,000 yards rushing, and he's running behind the best offensive line in the country. Wisconsin likes to run the football. I think they keep feeding them this year, and Wisconsin poised for another big year. So I got Jonathan Taylor of Wisconsin. Number 2, I got Bryce Love of Stanford. And, wow, Bryce Love was exciting down the stretch. This guy was playing on one leg. He kept coming out of the game and limping along. Still top 2,000 yards rushing. If they keep him healthy, he is clearly one of the top running backs in the country. He'll be up on everybody's Heisman list, and he's running behind my number 4 rated offensive line in the country. So I think Bryce Love's got to be up there. And then number 3, I'm going to go with Trace McSorley at Penn State. McSorley is the straw that stirs the drink at Penn State, and even without Barkley, like Miles Sanders as his replacement, the offensive line, when I talked to Coach Franklin this spring, he said that it goes from a weakness, which it's been pretty much his entire tenure there, to one of the strengths of the team. He's extremely high in the offensive line. I think McSorley gets it done. And Penn State plays a grand total of 1 team on the road that had a winning record last year. And so I think that they're a legitimate contender in the Big Ten. Quarterbacks on legitimate contenders are always up there, and those would be my top 3.
Yeah, I tend to look at guys who are, I guess, versatile is the best word, dual-threat quarterbacks. A Christian McCaffrey, who was absolutely robbed of the Heisman Trophy. Bryce Love falls in that same category, obviously. So did Barkley. So I like McSorley. I like that idea. People are going to look at him and say, can he have the same kind of success without Barkley? If he does, he's in the East, which is a huge advantage. He's going to play a lot of games on national TV. That's a huge advantage. He's really right up there. Jake Browning is the other guy. If he has the same kind of year he has as a sophomore, he's going to be pretty tough to beat as well. But honestly, I haven't dove into it too much. I try to be one of those guys, and Phil, I'm sure you're the same way, who waits till mid-season to start getting serious about this, because you got to let some games be played and some snaps be taken before you start evaluating these guys. I mean, Lamar Jackson won it 2 years ago, the first couple weeks of the season, and that turned out to be wrong. Deshaun Watson should have won that trophy.
Absolutely. I voted for Watson.
I did too, and that was before he took Alabama down in the championship game. Lamar Jackson had a poor last few games, fumbled away wins against Kentucky. He shouldn't have won the Heisman Trophy, but he won it early. McSorley has a chance to do that as well. We'll see what happens.
Well, I'll go with Khalil Tate. It was easy for me last year on my preseason
night games in the Pac-12. Look what happened to McCaffrey. They don't get exposure.
Well, we'll see. It's got a new coach who did awfully well when Johnny Manziel arrived, when they were both new together.
Yeah,
we'll see if he's an electric presence. Last year was easy for me preseason. Saquon Barkley was the best running back I had seen in many years since I saw Emmitt Smith in high school, or Latimer, who unfortunately knee injuries wrecked his career at South Carolina. So I'll go with the electric guy, and it is too early. In our final question here, Phil, in our last minute, you've got the Big Ten and the SEC tied for the best conference. So I'll ask you a little different question. Who's the best division? You got 4 strong in the Big Ten East. The SEC West, particularly if Joe Burrow, I'm a Joe Burrow fan, works out, LSU could make the SEC West 5 deep. Who's your best division in football?
To me, the best division in football is the Big Ten East. You're looking at 4 legitimate title contenders this year: Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, and Michigan State. Keep in mind, Michigan and Michigan State last year were among the least experienced teams in the country. I believe they were number 127 and number 129. And this year, both of those teams are in the top 20 experience level-wise. Michigan goes from 5 returning starters to having 17 this year. They go from 1 returning starter on defense to 9. They add in a Shea Patterson at QB. Michigan State plays 1 team on the road that had a winning record last year. So I think the Big Ten East is the best division in college football this year. And I've actually thrown that out. I do a couple hundred of these shows every month, and I threw it out in the SEC country, and I've never gotten any pushback. I think it's pretty much acknowledged right now around the country that the Big Ten East is the best.
Well, we totally love agree. That pick over here. I
totally agree.
Among the many colleges in America, I went to Ohio State. I went to the longest, so we like that. Phil Steele, 2018 college football preview is must-reading. Phil brags he's got 3 times the information in his magazine, any other magazine, and it is absolutely true. And Phil, you want to take a moment and give a plug to your online services that start up with the season?
Yeah, I appreciate that. You can go to philsteele.com and order the magazine online, or go to any bookstore across the country and just open up a copy and compare it to any other magazine out there, and you'll see 3 to 4 times the amount of information in the magazine. And also check out, I have a weekly newsletter that I put out during the season. It's called Inside the Press Box. I predict every game out there every week, give you solid reasoning, complete stats behind it. So go to InsideThePressBox.com. That's InsideThePressBox.com.
We do it, and we will continue to do it. Phil, cannot thank you enough. Hope to talk to you later in the season. Maybe we'll get a debate going on
Michael's
the Heisman.
going to have to buy a second copy of this magazine because this one's getting worn out already.
Absolutely. Yeah, I get dog-eared by the end of the year, guys.
Yeah.
Great talking football with you this morning.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Phil. Have a great Saturday.
Thanks.
Do just that. He's Mark Knutson. I'm Michael Klahr. It's time for Rockin' Company's Rockin' CU, featuring Adam Munsterteiger. Follow him on Twitter at AdamCM777. He is the publisher, editor, and chief writer at BuffStampede.com.
He does it all.
He does. He does it all.
One-man
shop. Folks who do it all, making Colorado beautiful with natural stone construction. For 5 decades, Rockin' Company, rockandco.com. And good Saturday morning, Adam.
Good morning, gentlemen. How are you?
Doing swell here. And we had the big recruiting weekend. Now is not too soon to see the fallout. Was it a success?
Yeah, I think so. They had 14 official visitors on campus, and then they got 3 commitments within 17 hours. Strangely, I guess, 2 of those commitments came from guys that weren't official visitors last weekend. Jake Wiley, the in-state offensive lineman from Eagle Crest High School that we've talked about on your show before, committed to the Buffs over some other offers, Arizona State, CSU, Oklahoma State, and Washington State. I actually got a chance to see him at CU's first summer camp in Boulder, and he's on the thin side at 6'5", 250, but he moves really well. He was doing some of the agility drills better than the skill guys at that camp, and he's relatively young for his grade, so some time for him to maybe fill into that frame a little bit. His dad's a pretty big guy, so if that's any indication, he will eventually fill out. He might be a gray shirt candidate just to kind of help him mature a little bit.
But this is huge. You know, this is huge. You've got to recruit your own state, and this kid is getting a lot of notice in Colorado. So incredible that they got him to commit.
Well, I just
now.
want to say that I'm 6'5", 250, and I don't feel like I'm on the thin side at all. I'd love to be on the thin side at 6'5", 250. It's amazing how we look at these kids and what we project them to be, and that's thin. That's freaking huge.
His weight may be distributed differently than yours, Mark.
I'm certain it is. I absolutely positive it is.
Well, that's, if you're talking about plug-and-play offensive linemen, obviously you want them in kind of that 290 to 300 range, and so he's not quite in that mold. But, yeah, I mean, offensive linemen generally are going to come in red shirt, so it's not that alarming. But, yeah, if you saw him, without pads on, you could definitely – he's obviously not Pac-12 ready, but, yeah, he could gray shirt and finally get on there. But, so the other 2 commits they got, one guy, Mekhi Blackman, we talked about on your show last week as well. He's a lanky 6 foot, 60-pound cornerback that's actually going to be finishing up his freshman year at College of San Mateo in July. So he's going to be able to transfer in with 3 to play 4. 3 to play 4 in the start of preseason camp, and they moved a couple guys to safety, Darian Rakestraw and Kevin George. So that kind of opened up a need for them to find a cornerback that could provide depth immediately. And then the other commit was another guy we talked about on your show, all the way from Austria, Valentin Sen, a 6'7", 280-pound offensive tackle. He pulled the trigger as well, committed. And so now Colorado's got 3 offensive line commits. And I've made a prediction that Cameron Johnson, a 3-star offensive lineman from Texas that's got 16 other offers, is going to commit to CU in the near future. If he does that, I think CU is pretty much going to be done with offensive line recruiting, which is pretty early. Then, of course, as we've talked about ad nauseum on your show, that they're going to have to, really get some defensive linemen to commit because that's been a glaring weakness. And then just yesterday, they picked up another commitment from a cornerback named Jalen Martin, who was one of those official visitors on campus last weekend, a top 100 California recruit, 6'2", 170, so he fits right into that long cornerback mold that McIntyre has recruited with great success during his time at CU. And he's the second cornerback recruit that CU's beaten Oregon out for this cycle, with KJ Trujillo doing that back in May. So a couple battles they won against the Ducks. The Ducks they're still battling with CU for some other guys, Ethan Rea, tight end, and Kyle Ford, a top wide receiver. Both those guys were on campus last week as well.
You and I started doing this 5 years. August 1st will be like 5 years ago that I started this show. It didn't always have this name. So we've been doing, and I never get tired after the years of, especially when we had John Henderson on, when we talk about who these guys. When you look at Jalen Martin with offers from Oregon, Washington State, Utah, Colorado State, never get tired of seeing the difference in who Colorado is beating. For these recruits, and obviously long and lanky is a signature look for University of Colorado defensive backfield.
Yep, and speaking of beating out a lot of other schools, I expect them to actually land another one of their official visitors that was on campus last weekend, a blue-chip athlete out of Michigan named Jaron Mangum. He's got 48 other offers, and he's a versatile, bigger running back if they decide to keep him on offense. I know McIntyre likes linebackers to convert guys that have played running back over to linebacker as well, and he's probably got the size to do that. So he says he's right now producing a commitment video for his announcement, so we don't know exactly when that's going to happen, but that's kind of the new trend now. These kids like to create these videos, I guess, for their commitment. So for a kid that's got 48 other offers, you're going to do whatever he says to wait on his announcement.
48 offers, yeah. He is quite in demand. One of the common denominators reading the site, buffstampede.com, getting your emails every weekday, which I love. The common denominator on offense for all of these stories is all these guys raving about offensive coordinator Darren Chiaverini as a dynamic personality and as an offensive mind, as a guy who actually goes in depth and gives these guys valuable insight in a way that they appreciate the critical analysis.
Yeah, you're either a good salesman or you're not, in my opinion. And Darren Chiaverini has that ability to not only sell the program, and it helps that he's a former CU player himself, so he can kind of point to his history to these recruits and say, look what going to CU can provide you in the future. He obviously was in the NFL out of CU as well, but he can just relate with these kids. He's got some swagger to him for an older guy, and he's able to really connect with these guys. And again, I think it's just something that you have the ability to. An example on the other end is Jim Jeffcoat. He had the Super Bowl rings and he had all the resume to throw at these players, but he just wasn't able to connect with them. And so that's certainly something that Darren Chiaverini's been able to do. And I think he's right now ranked among the top 30 recruiters nationally on 24/7 Sports.
We opened the show with a interview with Phil Steele, and we opened that interview talking about his 2018 college preview guide, which I had with me at the beach and on the plane, both ways.
In his bed.
Knutson says it's pillow. A little beat up. I need a new one. But we talked about the fact that University of Colorado is the number 4 improved team in the country on his list. And he went in depth on a lot of the stuff and how he's pretty high on the lines at Colorado, the improvement. He likes the talent, and so I think he sees the recruit, and he's a recruiting guy. Like you, a lot of his analysis comes from what he considers talent levels coming out of high school. For instance, at Buff Countdown this week, number 19, Chris Malumba, the defensive end, expected to start for the Buffs. Most improved lineman during the spring. You had Chris Malumba rated even higher. You really expect this guy to break out, I guess.
Yeah, if you just watch what he did last year, he had come in from the JUCO ranks and actually had redshirted his final year in the JUCO ranks, so he had a lot of rust to work off. And if you look at just what he was from game 1 to the season finale, he went from really a guy that shouldn't have been out there playing Pac-12 football, even in non-conference play against those opponents, to, at the end of the season, being one of their most consistent defensive players. He had 5 or more tackles in each of the last 5 games, and for their defensive lineman, it's with a 3-man front, you're not really set up to have a lot of big stats. So he was the guy that finally jumped first on the scene, a black belt in judo, and it was about him kind of getting acclimated to this level, but he certainly got some of the technique stuff down now, and I expect him to be a bright spot. I'm still not sure about the depth of the defensive line, but he's one guy in particular that I think is going to have a pretty darn good season. But it's kind of a shame, you bring him in from the junior college ranks. It takes him almost an entire season to get used to it, and now all of a sudden he's a senior. So that's, again, to my point, I don't think you want to keep going to the JUCO ranks to have to rely on these defensive linemen.
Yeah, and now he's ready to break out. So the top 40 will continue in our last 30 seconds here. What else is coming up this week on BuffStampede.com?
I mentioned Jaron Mangum, a 4-star recruit out of Michigan, might commit here to CU in the near future. And another guy to keep an eye on is Mark Perry from California, a safety prospect that just visited Colorado. He's down to the Arizona schools in Colorado. He's going to announce on the 4th of July, so definitely take a break from your barbecue on Wednesday to check out the site.
Absolutely. BuffStampede.com. Adam Munsterteiger at AdamCM777. Have a good week, Adam. We'll talk to you on Saturday.
You too. Thank you.